So hello everyone, you're very welcome to another discussion here at the Grad Island Summer Fair. So for this particular panel session, we're going to be talking about how to highlight your skills and experience in an interview, both in person, but mainly focusing on the video interview process, given that that's how most of them are being carried out nowadays. So with me to talk about this today is Karina Septer, Careers Advisor at the National College of Ireland, Adrian McCarthy, Programme Manager and Senior Recruiter at For Purpose, and last but not least, Peter Barry, Talent Acquisition Manager at CMS Distribution. So hello to you all.
Hello, Piers.
Hey, Piers.
Hi, everyone.
So as with all other talks, you can ask questions by using the chat feature, which you should be able to use the right-hand side of your screen, and you can upvote questions you would like to see answered, and time permission, we'll put as many of them to the panel as possible at the end. And there's also a poll, which you'll see to the right-hand side of the chat as well, where you can also have your say. So Karina, let's kick things off with you, if you don't mind. And I'd just like to ask about, preparation for an interview. So what are some of the kind of key tips you would have for graduates in preparing for interviews, in terms of, from when you get your interview date and then as the days get closer, and again, both for in-person interviews, but maybe especially focusing on video interviews first. So key tips when it comes to preparation.
Yeah, thank you, Piers, so much. I think it's a really good question, and I would say perhaps it's the most commonly discussed question when I have my mock interviews with students and graduates. So I would say, irrespectively, if your interview is run online or if that's a face-to-face interview, there are certain steps that I would recommend you follow. So first thing is research. You cannot imagine the number of occasions, for example, where I've sat on the interview and it was really obvious that the person that was on the other side of the table haven't done any research at all. For employers and us as career guidance counselor, that's news, because we really want to recruit people who are aware about the company and who have really good knowledge about the role that they're applying for. So I would say researching the company, having another look about the day-to-day responsibilities that you will have in the role is definitely a must before the interview. Additionally, if you know the name of the panelists on the interview, I would also suggest to go and research those people as well, because it's a little bit of psychological thing. You can go in for an interview without knowing those people, and you would really feel as if you are really a candidate in the interview. However, if you've done your research beforehand, and for example, you've looked at their LinkedIn profiles, you would feel more or less that you've met those people virtually before. And that sense of a candidate would then slightly change towards you being part of the team. So even for your sake of confidence, that's a really important step. Secondly, I would definitely suggest preparing your answers beforehand. So for example, when you look at the job description there usually is a criteria saying what kind of skills the employer is going to look for. So I would say note down those skills and really ensure that you prepared one or two examples using the competency-based approach called the STAR, which stands for situation, task, action, and result. So I'm sure we're going to cover that as we talk about the interviews a bit further over there. But essentially, having those examples prepared is a really key point before you go in for an interview. And some of the additional things when you have your interview online. So just first thing, ensure that you are really dressed to impress, because even though it's online interview, you still want to appear professionally. Ensure that there is nothing kind of going wrong in your background. So ensure it's rather plain background. If you know the kind of tool you're going to be using for an interview, and there is, for example, an option to hide your background, and that's something what you really can use if you don't really have any control about your environment in the house. And then secondly, if you are sharing a house with someone, just definitely let them know that you're going to have your interview, and just that there is no disturbance during your interview time. Internet connection, appropriate name when you type in and register for the platform as well is something that I would suggest to do. And body language is still important, even though it's a face-to-face interview. So for example, even before we've joined this call today, we had a really quick chat about how we had to adjust our body language, because again, you still want to make that good impression when you go for an interview. So you really want to maintain eye contact. So for example, as I'm talking right now, I'm actually not trying to look at the screen, but I'm trying to look at the camera. So I ensure that I maintain my eye contact with everybody. Smiling, having a really good posture is something that I would definitely recommend for everybody to do before they join a video interview. answer your
That's,
question there?
yeah, no, it's really, really good stuff, Karina. Very, very self-conscious now about my background and my eye contact now. So hopefully I'm adhering to all the rules. Just if I can come to you briefly, Adrian, on the kind of the same question, but kind of in your position, as someone who maybe carries out a lot of interviews and kind of screens people as well. From an employer kind of standpoint, is there any tips you'd like to throw in there yourself, just briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd absolutely agree with everything Karina said there. I think that's all very solid advice in terms of what you kind of need to do in terms of preparing beforehand for something. But I guess just to kind of add to that, so when you're doing your research as well, aside from looking at obviously the core kind of spec for the role, it's really good to kind of see if you can find out so a few things about the company, say like its values, what are its kind of key aims. That kind of information is typically available somewhere on the website if you do a bit of research, because aside from being able to fulfill the role, companies will want to see, is there a cultural fit? Is there a team fit? So kind of being able to kind of demonstrate that you have that and that you've looked into what the kind of values of the company are is really, really beneficial. And I guess trying to find out, in terms of what like kind of activity the company is going through, what's the kind of, current kind of projects or whatever that the company might be undertaking. Say, for example, if you look at the news section on the website, that'll often give you an insight into maybe what's happening and what's kind of going on there in terms of kind of live projects that the company might have. So when you're doing your research, just really try to gather as much information as you can before going into the interviews, that you're really just kind of well prepped about who the company is and who you'll be meeting as well. And I guess, just to kind of really echo what Karina said about kind of interview prep as well. If you're doing a remote kind of video interview, just making sure simple things that you have a clear background, and definitely letting people know in your household that you have an interview happening. We really want to just try and eliminate kind of any kind of background noise as much as you can. And dressing smart, dressing professionally, but also wearing something that's comfortable. You don't want to be distracted if you're wearing something that's that you're not comfortable in as well. And a good way to kind of try and gauge even the dress code for an interview, because that's actually something people can struggle with a bit as well, is to kind of maybe have a look at the website and also the sector that the organization is in. Will also kind of influence that. So say, for example, a tech company is likely to maybe have a slightly more kind of casual dress code than, say, a law firm. But it's always a good kind of standard to opt for something smart and professional looking, kind of regardless of the sector that the organization is in.
Yeah, again, really good stuff, Adrian. Really, really good practical tips that people can kind of look at right away, and all that information, is readily available, I'd say, on companies' websites and different things like that. Peter, just to kind of change the tack a little bit to you, again, from like an employer perspective, I'm sure you've carried out many interviews, in your position as well, and over the years, we've talked a little bit there about prep, so before the interview, and Adrian and Karina have touched on during the interview. But how would you say, especially for video interviews now, how can someone make a lasting impression? So you can do little things like, set up straight your dress code, make sure your internet connection's good, your background, they're kind of the basics now. But little things where you can't go up and have a firm handshake. It's not as obvious if you're making eye contact over a video interviews. From your position, what could someone do to make a lasting impression on a video interview?
Well, Piers, I mean, it's very important to make a lasting impression, be it face-to-face or in a video interview. What I found on the video interview side, and it follows on from really what Karina and Adrian were saying regarding preparation and researching for your interview. I think people who I've interviewed that made the most lasting impression are people who've done a deep dive into the company, into the values, as Adrian was mentioning, into the people, like Karina said. I would recommend that you really do a deep dive into the people. You get on LinkedIn, you look at where these people have worked before, you almost skills map them against your own background. So you look at where your interviewers have worked previously. You reach then to the next level to see, are there anybody or any of your connections worked in those businesses before? And you reach out to those people and you do that second level of research by talking to your peers who have worked in that business before and get that next level of understanding of maybe projects that are coming up in that business, maybe results of that business, issues, challenges. So you can bring that into your answers, because a lot of your answers are going to be quite very much like, what do you know about our business, or what do you know about these roles? They're very generic. So the more you can bring in very topical points that your interviewers will be impressed with because you've done that deep dive down. That really makes a lasting impression, because it almost, what you want to do is move away from the competency-based type in a graduate type of interview into a business conversation. And that makes that impression like, oh my God, like, you know, that guy really did deep dive down. I mean, it's commonplace, but people don't do it, is after the interview, when the interview has ended, thank the people. You thank the people, each of them, for their time, and you reiterate your interest in the role. And thank them for the time. And after the interview, make a point, not immediately, leave it maybe an hour or 2 hours. If it's at the end of the day, leave it in the morning, and send them an email. If you don't have their direct email address, reach out to them on LinkedIn and thank them again. That really does set you apart. But remember, if somebody's doing a day of interviews and they've interviewed 8 or 10 candidates, and you may be the 6th candidate, you know, or maybe a better point is maybe you're the 1st candidate, they may not remember you. But if you send them an email at the end of the day to thank them for their time, reiterate your interest again, you're pinged back into their minds.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. You know, things there that require a little bit of effort, maybe, you know, the research end, but then small things you can do as well. Like I said, Peter, like thanking people at the end of the interview can make a difference. And as you said, like, you're one of many people who are going in, so those little things can help you stand out. Queen, I've just shoot the next question over to you, that's okay, which is about, you know, talking about yourself. So in an interview situation, what advice would you have for someone? Like, how would you approach, you know, talking about yourself, but without coming across as, you know, brash or arrogant?
Well, I absolutely love this question, to be honest, because usually this kind of question would be used at the very beginning of the interview. So I would say for everyone, before they go for an interview, just really focus on this question, because it's really your opportunity to make that first impression on the interview panelists there. And I would say try to prepare in advance and definitely try to have a structure to your answer, because while this majority of the questions that you will have in interview will have a structure by the means of employers trying to assess a certain competence, and you can use the STAR approach for that. For tell me about yourself, it's a really open question, so you don't really have a structure over there. But when I work with clients, for example, I would suggest them to use a present, past, future approach. So for example, for present, you talk about your current position, what you are doing. So it can be the fact that you are a final year student, that you're about to graduate, and that you are really enjoying the course. You can talk about your university experience a little bit more by the means of you saying about your favorite modules, how are you doing academically in that institution. Then you move on to the past, and this is where you look at your previous work experience or any extracurricular activities that you've done to date. Over there, you would try to highlight those skills and experiences that would be relevant for the job, because the idea is that you don't talk about your work history, or you don't talk about the fact really that you've traveled 20 places or that you were born in Meath or whatever. It's really about you focusing on those relevant pieces of information that will serve well in an interview. So again, it's looking at the matching process over there. And then once you've completed your past section over there, you talk about the future. And this is where this is really an opportunity for you as a candidate to bring back the conversation to the role that you have applied for. So let's say you've applied for HR intern position. This is where you would say that how excited you are to be in this interview, and you can talk a little bit more about your future plans in relation to HR's career. And at the same time, it's important for you to highlight that you are really interested in HR role specifically within this company, because if you're going to come across as a person who is generally looking to get experience in HR, that may not seem very attractive to employers, because again, they really want to recruit someone who really wants to work with that specific company. So all the things that Adrian and Peter were saying before about research, it's an opportunity for you to present that piece of information and say that, for example, I'm really interested in this HR position with company X because you have an amazing employee program implemented in 2018 that served 200 employees, and the impact of that program was X, Y, and Z. What you will find is that there is actually a lot of websites over there where you can kind of collect all that information, or at the same time using LinkedIn and talking to people, trying to figure out about what is it so unique about this specific company, what kind of programs they have implemented, etc. So, and just to kind of summarize, if you really use present, fast, and future model, it will really help you to structure your answers. And I would say it's the most important thing, because you don't really want to go through your experience in a reverse chronological order, because it will take a lot of time and it may not be actually relevant for the position that you have applied for.
Yeah, again, that makes perfect sense, Karina. You know, stick to the facts and what's relevant to that interview process, as opposed to, you know, trying to, you know, get out your autobiography, and that, which can be tempting if people get nervous and stuff. Or if you stick to the facts, I think that's a good way to look at it. Adrian, if we just, I'll come to you, Peter, next one about, you know, experience, you know, highlighting that interview. But Adrian, in terms of soft and hard skills, you know, I think it's easy enough to put stuff down in the CV and writing. I can use Excel, I can use Adobe Premiere, InDesign, whatever the case may be. But in an interview itself, what's the best way to get across, you know, what kind of skills you have, both on the soft side and the hard side as well?
Yeah, so I suppose in an interview for a graduate role, you're kind of guaranteed to be asked about kind of certain soft skills generally. So the key things that come up kind of consistently would be things like presentation skills, communication skills, working under pressure, time management. All of those would be kind of very kind of typical kind of skill-based questions you'd be asked about within an interview. So the best way to kind of highlight those is, you know, you need to go a little bit further than maybe just saying that you're good at managing your time. So having, for example, you know, a situation to back up and provide evidence to that. So say, for example, if the interviewer asks you about what are your time management skills, like how do you deal with a lot of different kind of priorities, it's good to be able to apply a situation to that and say, well, I'm very comfortable at managing, you know, a lot of priorities at once. And then maybe drawing on your experience, say, for example, if you're in final year, you could talk about how you're managing, say, dissertation, if you're doing that alongside your final year modules and exams, plus the other stuff that you have going on in your life. So say, for example, if you're doing any kind of part-time work, even any extracurricular voluntary stuff, and kind of just giving them, you know, kind of an example of how you kind of deal with all of those things at once. What kind of systems do you use to kind of keep everything spinning? And how, I suppose, kind of the outcome of that, you know, means that you're able to get your work completed. So I think when you're highlighting, you know, kind of your key skills, it's always good to have kind of evidence and a situation to kind of back up what you're saying. And like really, you know, kind of there's kind of key things that will come up around, you know, those kind of soft skills in particular. And I suppose in terms of kind of identifying the hard skills, that's a case of maybe referring back to the job spec and the person spec. To maybe just kind of look at those and kind of see what are the things that are really highlighted under the kind of essential kind of criteria, because you'll likely be asked about, you know, say, for example, if it's a marketing role, have you used things like Adobe, Canva? Those are the kind of things that you'd commonly look for. So just kind of seeing what's in the spec, and you can even draw from the soft skills there as well, because they'll likely be included somewhere within that as well.
Yeah, again, look, perfect, really, really good practical advice as well. And Peter, just come to you then on the flip side, that as opposed to skills, when it comes to experiences, you know, especially I think when you've kind of had a long enough career, you can draw on real world experiences in the workplace. But when you're a graduate who might only, you know, your experiences are, you know, college, maybe a J1, something like that, maybe a part-time job. How do you best get your experiences across in an interview, and how do you know which ones to maybe leave out, even though you maybe think they might be slightly relevant? But how do you know what to keep in, what to include, and what to exclude? You're on mute there, Barry. Sorry.
I'm on mute there. That's it. So one of us has to go on mute at some point there. So when candidates have very low levels of experience, graduates and so on, people entering the workforce, they carry a huge amount of stress about this issue. I always try and tell them it is about storytelling, okay, and skills mapping. So the most important thing is you take that job spec and you put the job spec down on paper. These things is like studying for an exam, and you get your experience and you map all the required experience across onto your skill set, but not as in I can do this, I can do this. It's a practical example, a story of how you achieved this, or how you actually, you know, did that particular skill that's required. And it doesn't have to be in a workplace environment. As Adrian was saying, You can draw it from your life experience, from a community project or project in college, something you did, an extracurricular activity, your part-time job. You can always draw that and have a concise, relevant example. And that is the best way to portray your experience in an interview when you don't have any. Use language. It doesn't always necessarily try and speak like you're working in a corporate environment or working in the company that you're aiming to be. Speak in your own experience language and just put it across. Because essentially what they're doing is they're asking you a question in order to bring a follow-up question to see how you'll react. So it's important to just treat it as storytelling. Concise, start, middle, and end, to show that has a particular, you can achieve that particular skill. And the most important thing as well, bringing on from what Adrian and Karina said about interview and answering questions, is we have a tendency to fill spaces with sound. So if you feel you've answered your question, stop. It is not your job as the candidate to move the interview along. It is the interviewer's job. There may be an uncomfortable pause, and that's the bit we have to watch with, where we try and start our answer again and we talk ourselves out. When you feel you've answered the question adequately, you stop. And the interview will then move it on, maybe after a few seconds. Don't stress about those few seconds.
I just add to that really quickly, Pierce.
Of course, Adrian, go ahead.
That's really good advice that Peter gave about that kind of not feeling the need to over answer, because it is a kind of a trap that people can fall into. And it can sometimes happen because of nerves or kind of, trying to fill that kind of, few seconds of a pause between the next question. But, definitely try to avoid that and try to be as concise as possible as well when answering, because, if you end up kind of over answering or just going on a bit kind of too long with your answer, it does really eat into the interview time. It's very timed when you're kind of trying to get through an interview, so you're really under pressure as the interviewer as well. So definitely try to avoid that kind of pitfall of giving too much information or kind of veering away from the original question.
Yeah, excellent. I think it's one thing that's come up quite a lot during this talk is, things to, timing is obviously important, but the way to keep to the facts and keep it relevant. That's, one thing that's really, really key. One of the questions that's just popping up a lot here in the chat that I was going to ask, but I'm not myself anyway, but it's one that's come up continuously, which is, at the end of an interview when you're asked, do you have any questions for us? Everyone's asking, what do I say here? Is it better to say nothing or should I say anything? Peter, would you mind if I just throw this back to you for this one, and then you guys can all contribute to this one as well, because it's a very popular question. So essentially, at the end of an interview when you're asked, do you have any questions for us? Would you have any advice on what to say to that? Yeah,
again, this is an area where we tend to overanalyze ourselves. We overthink it. The key question you ask straight away is, why is this job available? You need to get the company, you need to interview them as much as you. Why is the job available? Follow-on questions to that. I mean, you can ask about learning and development is always a key point. Culture, ask them about the culture of their company. You can be very direct. I have been asked about diversity and inclusion policies. But just to reiterate, the first one that you need to go with is, why is this job available?
Why is this job available? So I'm sure everyone took that one down. Of course, Karina, jump in there.
I would say when I do practice interview with students, quite usually there would be that question, well, I'm not 100% sure if I'm supposed to ask anything at all. So I would say, definitely, you don't really want to be in a position where you don't ask any questions at all, because it may look to the interviewer as if you were not interested in the role at all. You just wanted to get over with your interview. So at least 2 or 3 questions you need to have prepared. So as Peter was saying, like questions in relation to personal development, about the programs that the company has implemented, or maybe something in relation to culture and values of the company. But I would say that if you've done your research and you really want this job, naturally you would have a lot of questions. And quite often when we look at the job description, there can be some gaps over there where you may not necessarily know exactly what kind of CRM system they're using, how it's implemented in the company, and how do they use it. So you can ask all these questions at the end of the interview. Not only it will show that you've actually done your homework and you've researched the company and the job description, but at the same time, it will really look like you are in the job and you are thinking as if you are doing the job. And I do think employers usually really appreciate that. And just lastly, in relation to this question, is that if you are really proactive in the interview, you will notice it's actually a two-way conversation. So even though you're being interviewed, there will be some introduction, or the interviewers will let you know a bit more about the company or the role. So if you really apply your listening skills, you can use that at the end of the interview. And then, for example, you can say, well, Barry has mentioned that at the beginning of the role, there will be X, Y, and Z programs that I have to attend. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? So it's actually an opportunity for yourself to demonstrate that you were active and you were listening what has been said previously. So I would say it's a really important thing that you can do, again, if you're not 100% sure what kind of questions you want to ask.
Yeah, really good stuff there. There was just, we did run a poll, while our guys were talking, and the question was, which of these 5 common interview questions do you feel is the most difficult to answer? And the one that came out on top was actually, what is your greatest weakness? Which I think is really good. And so, Adrian, would you have any advice on how to answer that question if it came up in an interview?
Yeah, so if that question is asked, I guess what the interview panel is kind of looking for is really kind of self-awareness, does someone know what their strengths are, but also what their area for development is. So if you're asked that, having a sense yourself of maybe an area that you kind of need to work on or develop before you go into the interview is kind of what you need to think about. And the way to kind of answer it is you can say, that you might have struggled a bit, say, for example, if you had some issues maybe managing your time, but, kind of how you resolved that and the action that you took again to kind of address that. And then you can kind of add to that it's an area that you're continuously working on as well. So it doesn't need to be a negative. It doesn't need to be a fully kind of negative answer in the sense of I'm not good at this. So you can kind of put it in a way that I've struggled a bit with this particular area. It's an area that I'm conscious of and that I've worked on. And it's something that when I get into this role that I'd like to kind of continue improving on. And especially if it's a graduate role as well, there'll be an emphasis kind of on L&D. You're likely to have, if it's a good program, kind of a mentoring or kind of training structure there. So we're not expecting someone to be kind of perfectly rounded and have everything perfected at any stage of your career. Even, everyone is always developing and has things that they can add to their skill. Kind of showing that you're aware of maybe what one of your less kind of strong areas is and kind of how you're going to develop that and how you've kind of taken steps to develop it as well.
Excellent, good stuff. Hope everyone, took loads of notes there on that one, because that was the one people wanted to answer to.
Here, sorry, can I
Peter, just come to you. Yeah, of course, Karina, jump ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you over there. So actually, just 2 quick things that I wanted to say about this is, first thing, in relation to weaknesses, try to use a skill and not quality, because if you're going to talk about you as a person, it would be a really difficult one in terms of giving an example of how you overcome it. So I would definitely focus on the skill. And then the second thing is that it's okay to talk about something that you're currently still working on. But one thing is that double check the job description. And if that particular skill is mentioned in the job description, you don't really want to talk about it as your weakness. You probably want to select something else that is not part of the job description. Because again, if a job description is very administrative, numerical, high attention to detail, and let's say numerical, you would say is not your greatest skill, perhaps I would focus on some other skill that was not listed over there.
Yeah, I think that's actually a brilliant piece of advice, really, really good. We've only got about a minute left here, Peter, so I'm going to fire the last question over to you. All the pressure on yourself to close us off. This is maybe a slightly awkward question that could come up in an interview, but say you've applied for a job and there's no mention of salary on the job application, and you're kind of hoping it would come up in the interview process, but it hasn't. Is it a case where it would be seen as maybe a rude question to ask, what is the salary, or can you bring it up, and in the course of the interview process?
Well, there's probably a technical answer to this question, and then there's my 20 years of experience answer to this question. And I'm going to go with my experience. The panel may disagree with me. I think that there's roundabout ways of finding what the salary is. There's Glassdoor, there's Indeed Analytics, there's Pay Scale. You'll roughly get in or around that figure. So do your research on average salaries. The way I answer this question to people that I'm helping, especially in the interview process, is it's not the Victorian era. You're going to get paid a decent salary for your role. It's going to be in and around market average. So don't ask them in the interview. It's a very common thing when we talked earlier about what questions can I ask at the end of interview. The most common one I get is, well, what's the salary and the benefits? Leave it till later on. A good interviewer will bring in a pre-screen, will have asked you what your salary expectations are. It may be on the application. It's not something to interview. It's more for the end when the offer comes. Okay. So I personally wouldn't ask it during the early stages of the interview process. Do some background on it.
Yeah, perfect. And again, just really, really good practical advice that people can implement. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I think we would have kept going for another while there. But look, thanks so much to all our panel. Really appreciate your time. To Karina, Adrian, and Peter, thanks so much. And thank you all for watching again. If you want to rewatch this session or you joined midway through, it's going to be available to watch on demand from right here. The next panel discussion is all about arts degrees and what opportunities are out there for graduates with this qualification. So until the next talk, goodbye.